The ubiquity of hanging in the works of William S. Burroughs is one of their most off-putting qualities. Hanging strikes one as extreme, excessive, exaggerated, and barbarous. Hanging, quite frankly, doesn't fit in our modern view of society. In developed, democratic nations, hanging figures as a vestige of antiquated, outdated, and cruel forms of social organization. What's more, it feels crude and indecorous, not neat or efficient enough to be easily incorporated into our already overwhelmed mental economies. As such, choosing to feature hanging so prominently is already an act of taboo and transgression, not only to literary norms and standards of public decency, but to the reader's individual sense of peace. To read Burroughs's wild hanging rituals, lavished with grotesquerie and drenched in lasciviousness, one cannot but help feel their minds invaded by something absolutely obscene. It is hard to get used to regular descriptions of hangings, fortified as one may claim one's mind to be. It is an invasive act, implicating its viewers, and hence susceptible to stir the emotions of those who view it, regardless of their moral stance toward its justice. Moreover, in depicting hangings in his works, Burroughs is performing an act of publishing. By publishing, I mean that way in which Michel Foucault described the function of torture and execution as a public spectacle, publishing the truth of the crime therein condemned. Quote, "Thus, justice had the crime reenacted before the eyes of all, publishing it in its truth, and at the same time annulling it in the death of the guilty man." End quote. The public nature of punishment is in its own way crude, for it suggests overtly the need to publicly and ritually reinforce the rule of law's legitimacy, instead of it being impressed upon the hearts and consciences of the civilized. The demand the law makes of those whose consent it depends on is, in a way, too much, paradoxical in the exponentially increasing extremes it demands of its enforcers and citizens. On the one hand, it must be ritualized and taken on as a weight the state must bear, necessitating the creation of institutions for the apprehension, trying, and punishing of criminals. The need for the state as an arm of discipline and punishment therefore arises from the needs imposed by new moral paradigms and modes of social organization. Burroughs's choice to highlight this process is elevated to the level of perceptive, penetrating irony, as well as creative reinvention, by eroticizing it. In other words, Burroughs introduces a strange, prurient twist to a familiar framework for human interaction: the reward-punishment dichotomy. If capital punishment gains its legitimacy from staging its necessity, enacting its own justification in ritualized form, it does so by exploiting and renegotiating the function of rewards and punishments as fundamental elements of human decision-making. Treating human behavior as a transactional operation in a meritocratic moral marketplace, capital punishment comes to feel on this view as the essential result of a predictable equation, and hence necessary to maintain an already fragile social order. Subtly turning the victim of abusive state power into a potentially threatening aggressor in need of carefully calibrated subdual by cutthroat laws, this view of capital punishment uses spectacle as a key element of a fundamentally coercive relationship. What Burroughs does, and is the key turn of his hanging routines, is that using the framework of the erotic, he shows what these relationship dynamics of reward and punishment effectively are: extreme, excessive, crude, manipulative, and thriving on death. Burroughs therefore exposes the fundamentally prurient nature of the law, which depends upon disrobing man, making him the nude victim of state excesses. That all this ends in death is the result of Burroughs's deeply apocalyptic chord. While Burroughs was infinitely imaginative, all of his imaginings are tainted heavily by his preoccupation with death. Considering that in 1951 he accidentally shot his wife Joan Vollmer in the head in Mexico City, it's not hard to wonder why Burroughs might have been so constantly concerned with death as a living reality. Taking what were doubtless great anxieties for him resulting from this event plaguing his mind for the rest of his life, Burroughs turned death into a central element of his fiction as a form of personal and societal coping. Often speaking to the squalor lived in by those on the margins of society, both literally and by way of analogy, Burroughs's works center death in order to remind us who may be so privileged as to have forgotten its ubiquity, just how common it is for so many. Now, while it might be a stretch to call this a form of advocacy or protest, it certainly addresses very real sociopolitical needs of oppressed communities suffering at the hands of often nefarious political actors. Hence, Burroughs's hangings are so often presented as overtly malicious, sadistic, and excessive beyond concern for the life of the victim. His hanging routines are either in the exclusive service of the one performing the hanging, not for a moment showing empathy at being responsible for the death of the hanged, or else an excessive commingling of bodies that challenges the value of life by exceeding its fragile fetters. Perhaps, Burroughs seems to argue, life is, for those who choose, an optional pleasure, and perhaps those searching for greater pleasures tragically exceed life and hence perish. There is therefore something tragic about the hangings of Burroughs, but also deeply paradoxical. For in them we may often be surprised not just by cruelty and aversion, but also by lyrical language, soaring visions of excess near transcendent in their emotional valences, and outbursts of happiness. Consider the following routine from the section of Naked Lunch entitled Hassan's Rumpus Room, one of my favorites. Gilt and red plush, rococo bar backed by pink shell. The air is cloyed with a sweet, evil substance like decayed honey. Men and women in evening dress sip pousse cafes through alabaster tubes. A Near East mugwump sits naked on a bar stool covered in pink silk. He licks warm honey from a crystal goblet with a long black tongue. His genitals are perfectly formed, circumcised cock, black, shiny pubic hairs. His lips are thin and purple-blue like the lips of a penis, his eyes blank with insect calm. The mugwump has no liver, maintaining himself exclusive on sweets. Mugwump push a slender blonde youth to a couch and strip him expertly. "Stand up and turn around," he orders in telepathic pictographs. He ties the boy's hands behind him with a red silk cord. "Tonight we make it all the way." "No, no," screams the boy. "Yes, yes." Cocks ejaculate in silent yes. Mugwump parts silk curtains, reveal a teak wood gallows against a lighted screen of red flint. Gallows is on a dais of Aztec mosaics. The boy crumples to his knees with a long "oh," shitting and pissing in terror. He feels the shit warm between his thighs. A great wave of hot blood swells his lips and throat. His body contracts into a fetal position and sperm spurts hot into his face. The mugwump dips hot perfumed water from alabaster bowl, pensively washes the boy's ass and cock, drying him with a soft blue towel. A warm wind plays over the boy's body, and the hairs float free. The mugwump puts a hand under the boy's chest and pulls him to his feet. Holding him by both pinioned elbows, propels him up the steps and under the noose. He stands in front of the boy, holding the noose in both hands. The boy looks into mugwump eyes, blank as obsidian mirrors, pools of black blood, glory holes in a toilet wall closing on the last erection. An old garbage collector, fine face and yellow as Chinese ivory, blows the blast on his dented brass horn, wakes the Spanish pimp with a hard-on. Horse staggers out through dust and shit and litter of dead kittens, carrying bales of aborted fetuses, broken condoms, bloody Kotex, shit wrapped in bright color comics. A vast, still harbor of iridescent water. Deserted gas well flares on the smoky horizon. Stink of oil and sewage. Sick sharks swim through the black water, belch sulfur from rotting livers, ignore a bloody, broken Icarus. Naked Mr. America, burning frantic with self-bone love, screams out, "My asshole confounds the Louvre! I fart ambrosia and shit pure gold turds! My cock spurts soft diamonds in the morning sunlight!" He plummets from the eyeless lighthouse, kissing and jacking off in face of the black mirror, glides oblique down with cryptic condoms and mosaic of 1,000 newspapers through a drowned city of red brick to settle in black mud with tin cans and beer bottles, gangsters in concrete, pistols pounded flat and meaningless to avoid short-term inspection of prurient ballistic experts. He waits the slow striptease of erosion with fossil loins. The mugwump slips the noose over the boy's head and tightens the knot caressingly behind the left ear. The boy's penis is retracted, his balls tight. He looks straight ahead, breathing deeply. The mugwump sidles around the boy, goosing him and caressing his genitals in hieroglyphs of mockery. He moves in behind the boy with a series of bumps and shoves his cock up the boy's ass. He stands there moving in circular gyrations. The guests shush each other, nudge and giggle. Suddenly the mugwump pushes the boy forward into space, free of his cock. He steadies the boy with his hands on the hip bones, reaches up with his stylized hieroglyph hands and snaps the boy's neck. A shudder passes through the boy's body. His penis rises in 3 great surges, pulling his pelvis up, ejaculates immediately. Green sparks explode behind his eyes. A sweet toothache pain shoots through his neck down the spine to the groin, contracting the body in spasms of delight. His whole body squeezes out through his cock. A final spasm throws a great spurt of sperm across the red screen like a shooting star. The boy falls with soft, gutty suction through a maze of penny arcades and dirty pictures. A sharp turd shoots clean out his ass. Farts shake his slender body. Sky rockets burst in green clusters across the great river. He hears the faint putt-putt of a motorboat in jungle twilight. Under silent wings of the anopheles mosquito. The mugwump pulls the boy back onto his cock. The boy squirms, impaled like a speared fish. The mugwump swings on the boy's back, his body contracting in fluid waves. Blood flows down the boy's chin from his mouth, half open, sweet and sulky in death. The mugwump falls with a fluid, sated pop. This is indeed quite a strange juxtaposition. Burroughs seems to be asking us to hold both sides of an equation that cancels out in each hand, reveling in something that we, and perhaps also the characters, know to be fatal and final. Perhaps these hangings are a challenge to finality, a big middle finger to society, to the way we created as a way to flee from our anxious white-knuckling of life such that we forget to live it. Perhaps it's an irresponsible call for personal experimentation with the extreme. Perhaps it's a demand to confront the pain of the present as a matter inscribed not just on our consciences and the unconscious anxieties we bear, but also outwardly on our bodies and reflected in the ways we use them. Foucault expresses a similar view on torture and capital punishment, when in Discipline and Punish, he describes the purposeful role of the body in such rituals, writing that in the 18th century, judicial torture functioned in that strange economy in which the ritual that produced the truth went side by side with the ritual that imposed the punishment. The body interrogated in torture constituted the point of application of the punishment and the locus of extortion of the truth. And just as presumption was inseparably an element in the investigation and a fragment of guilt, the regulated pain involved in judicial torture was a means both of punishment and of investigation. It was the task of the guilty man to bear openly his condemnation and the truth of the crime that he had committed. His body displayed, exhibited in procession, tortured, served as the public support of a procedure that had hitherto remained in the shade. In him, on him, the sentence had to be legible for all. The condemned man published his crime and the justice that had been meted out to him by bearing them physically on his body. It established the public execution as the moment of truth. Doubtless other interpretations could be levied to make explicable the sheer excess of Burroughs's hanging routines. It seems likely, too, that all of these contain a bit of truth. Regardless, these multiple interlocking possibilities make clear the variegated, aesthetically sensitive moral and political net Burroughs is weaving and making us to navigate. Hence, the strangest moment when reading Burroughs is when the function of hanging begins to make some kind of sense, insofar as we can make explicable that the perpetrator of the hanging wants it, senses some fulfillment of his desires in it, has the power to do so, and constructs these elaborate, realized fantasy scenarios as a means to manufacture new erotic contacts. We start to understand that, crude and unseemly as it is, hanging, and by extension the entire economy of pain on which society runs, can be justified, rationalized for those who desire it badly enough. For in the worlds of Burroughs, we feel ourselves constantly haunted by a specter of desire that is deeper than appetite. It is demand, aching, desperation, longing, that insatiable need for true contact and feeling. The same deep emotions that make possible all manner of addictions, Burroughs' often predictable, near monotonous portrayal of hangings help the reader to recognize within themselves the drive that makes life worth living, as well as risking. It defines and explores the precariousness that is man, stretched over an abyss, as Nietzsche puts it. To face such existential depth and harrowingness in modern society, made near unlivable at times by the risks posed by technology, economic and environmental collapse, and the apocalyptically destructive capacity of humanity, requires, so Burroughs posits, the entirety of our imaginative capacities. Most importantly, it requires of us an unflinchingly probing honesty into the cruelty we are capable of, the centrality of desire, and our capacity to envision daring futures.